Drew Spence from the Dynamic Universe. We're here today. I think we're going to call this one, Are There Any Shortcuts in Art? And I think that's going to be the question for today. I think that's the one we're going to spin off of. So, who is Troy Tullium? Or Troy Toole? That's his real name. He is an artist, photographer, sometimes editor, currently an art teacher, among a bunch of other things. He's my buddy for about, I don't even know, more than 10 years now. We've been in acquaintance with each other, and he's West Coast, I'm East Coast. But throughout the years, we've shared art, talked about concepts, debated, argued. We do all that stuff. That's one of my peeps. So recently, that he does a thing where he streams and he shows himself working on all of his art stuff. And I tend to stream and show myself working in the Daz 3D environment, the Daz Studio environment, or I'm playing back one of the tapes. This is a video from one of my courses. I think this is the comic creation one. I'm not sure if it's part one or two, but or this might be a supplemental video where I'm explaining like how to make like a make the art jump over a panel. I can't remember, but that's something. I think that's what that is. But me and him discuss art concepts all the time, and we get into it and we go back and forth about it. And the question is, are there any shortcuts in art? Which is a big question. And we're gonna relate that to comics in a bit because I do the CGI comic book the thing using a lot of 3D assets. And he has seen my comics, and he's gotten some. He's gotten copies of my books, and he said, "Oh my goodness, looking at this, like I want to do this. Like I'm gonna dive into 3D. I'm gonna install Daz Studio, and I'm gonna make some comics because this looks crazy." And watching one of my videos of me making my books and seeing, how long it takes to put together a scene, all of that stuff, he said, I thought I was going to make a book doing this using that system, but shoot, I'm going to stick to drawing. And it became kind of funny because it's like, yeah, a lot of people think 3D or CGI is a shortcut to making comics and in a bigger picture, making art. And you've got this concept in your head that you're just going to download some 3D software, throw some figures around, and before you know it, bam, you've got a comic book, which basically is an insult to anyone who does CGI art or render art, as we tend to call it among ourselves, and also people who make comic books. That you can simply download some software with some 3D models in it, and you've got the same thing that masters have done for decades. Like somehow you're going to end up where they are in a shorter amount of time because you're using digital assets, as if digital photography is a shortcut to being a photographer and you don't need to understand photography because you're using the help of a computer. It's an interesting concept to sort of throw in front of people and think this is going to get you there quicker. This is going to somehow help you bridge the gap and be the thing. When I first discovered Daz Studio, I was torn between a couple of different ways of making my comic because I'm from a traditional background. I draw myself, went to school for it, yeah. And I have a whole bunch of comics sitting on my shelf that I've drawn. A whole bunch of them. Some of them look crappy where I'm just doodling and I'm just freestyling and making up stuff as I go along. You know, no one is on model because all the characters are basically, I forget what the haircut was in 7 pages. Like I'm just making it as I go along. And then some I kind of wanted to sit down in a pocket and basically draw better. So that I have some books that I draw really nice. And people will say, wow, your skill got better. It's not that it got better. I just was drawing, trying to be at a higher level. And some of my better drawn books were before some of my doodle type books. The reason I say that is because it seems as if people think drawing is some kind of weird skill that you just can't develop and it's like a special knack, and it's not. Firstly, if you can doodle, you can draw a comic book. So to say that you're using CGI or 3D assets because you can't draw is basically wrong, because anyone can draw Anyone can doodle. It doesn't take that long. The same amount of hours it takes to become proficient in CGI art to create a book is the same amount of time it would take to learn how to draw the basics of a comic. Where people are saying it's like, well, I want to be a one-man team. And arguably that could be an advantage or a disadvantage depending on your skill level. If you're not a good writer, just because you model 3D or play around with it, you're not going to suddenly become a good writer. And if you don't do lettering and you don't understand the nuances of lettering, you're not going to become a great letterer just because you're doing your book by yourself. These are all the common pitfalls where you say the advantage is doing everything myself, being a one-man army, but then you've got to wear all these hats and wear them well. And where there's a hurdle for CGI aided comics is that a lot of people are worrying about the CGI part, but not paying attention to the comic book part, where just learning CGI is not enough. What is the parallel? Being able to draw a superhero flying through the air, or punching a hole through a wall, or leaping or in some cool dynamic pose is not the same as doing sequential art. People who make comics know this. Who is that guy with the portfolio? The guy sitting on the end in the con who's selling his own original characters plus artwork of known characters. That's not a sequential artist. That's not a comic book artist. That is a person who draws or makes pinups. A lot of times you'll see on social media, someone will share a picture of their characters running all together. You know, the ubiquitous superhero pose. And people will chime in and go, wow, I would buy this book. I would support this. Let's get on your Kickstarter. I want to see this as a comic. And technically, that's not proof of a skill of telling a story. It's pinup, which if you're in the comic book universe, you kind of know that's the easiest thing to do. That's like day one, drawing a character, throwing a punch, throwing a kick, knocking someone out, shooting a gun, shooting a laser gun, dodging something. That's the entry level. Sequential art is a lot more than that. So when you begin to supplant that skill set and just say, hey, if you render your book using this medium, you can bypass all the knowledge it takes to make a comic book and just arrive on your last day because, hey, once you get the look down, you've got a comic book. Imagine that if someone says, once you can draw in a comic book style, you've got a comic book. Imagine what that says to the letterers, people who do the paneling, the editors who edit books and work on it, the cartoonists who do both the writing and also the art. Imagine what that says to them. That if you just say, hey, if I can draw something that looks like it lands in the park of a comic book, I'm there with everyone else. Let's ignore the years. Let's ignore the experience. Some of it is let's ignore the actual traditional training, your degrees. Let's ignore all of that. As long as I land in the ballpark of looking something like a book, I deserve the credit of being there with you. Nowhere else is that tolerated. Nowhere else. No one would say because you can run around the track, you deserve to be in the Olympics and you're heralded. No one says that. But when we look at the disparity of the different art mediums, we tend to look at the best examples. We say, oh, if it doesn't look like the best guy that's ever done it, it doesn't really count. And that's not true. If you want to draw, draw. We're not going to discuss some sort of disability or something else that seems to brush against the norm. We'll just say for the average person, the same amount of time it takes to learn CGI and become proficient enough to make a work of note is the same amount of time it would take you to learn to draw or paint or any other medium. Making comics and sequential art is a different skill. It is not drawing characters. It is not pinups. It's sequential art. Everyone understands this except those who aren't into it because they make assumptions that because you can do step 1, you probably can do step 10. Not true at all. Let's fast forward this. And maybe we should look at some real world examples and talk about this. This is who we looking at here. This is Lynn Welly, who is a peer who also has a book series that you can check out. I am actually on their DeviantArt. I'm not going to go too far because I don't know, this might not be kosher to do this, but doesn't matter. Excellent artist, very cool work. I consider this to be a peer. We've attended groups together. I'm familiar with the artist, but we're looking at the work they've created. Can we do this? How does this work here? Let's take a look at some of their work. When you understand what this person has done to create this level of art, how much, look at this image. The spider crawling by the character. This is not simply a bunch of render art. This is sequential art meant to go together. Obviously, it looks like it's formatted for mobile, but this is work. This is all the learning stages. This is all the work that goes into it. If you really believe you're going to download Daz Studio, install some figures and some sets, and arrive here, you're mistaken. There is no shortcut to art. It doesn't help. It doesn't work. You're going to have to end up being an artist. If you're not an artist, you're not going to make any art. It's just that simple. And if anyone is telling you that you will somehow end up in the world of artists without actually learning to be an artist, it's not going to happen. There aren't shortcuts. There aren't any filters. You're not going to hit a button and arrive at being an artist. And when you suggest that to anyone, you're insulting those of us who have put years in, vast amount of hours, toiling over this, learning, experimenting, trying to master a craft to create a book. And just because the medium is different, the baseline skills do not translate. The techniques you use in traditional drawing, I should say this, let's put this more clearly. The overall concepts are there, the techniques are different. The techniques are different. And again, when we begin to get a little confused about what it takes to make a comic, we have some people chiming in who have never made a comic. So you're telling people advice about making comics when you haven't made one yourself, which really is weird because you're not really reading books to say, I'm a fan. Maybe you feel like you've read a whole bunch of comics, so you know because you have a reader base mentality. You're not a peer because you don't make comics, and you're not really a critic because you're not on the pulse of what's happening today, which is books like this. This is the cutting edge of today. This level of art is sort of where it's at right now. Maybe a year from now, it'll look different. Maybe new tools will arrive. Maybe new rendering engines will arrive. All that could happen. But if you're going to say, well, where is it at today? This is pretty much where it's at today. So to suggest that you just arrive here overnight is pretty insane. As if you could spend $20, buy something, even my course. Even the course that I sell about making comics is very comprehensive. I cover the word balloons, I cover the panels, I cover plot, I cover dialogue, I cover the hero's journey, and I translate the tools from the traditional medium to the CGI medium. Why is there a translation? Because the foundational concepts are the same, the techniques are different, the mediums are different. The goal is excellent storytelling. I better not show any more of their work before I get one of them emails. But let's take a look at Demon Division. This is done by a combo. We're also on the DeviantArt site. Let's try to get this going. If you knew this artist and knew how much this team works on this book, how many times they've gone over it, redone the pages, rewritten the story, trying to get it to a level of polish. This is not the stuff that you just end up coming across in one day and say, oh, just because I installed some stuff, I'm here. So again, who's ever going to tell you there's a shortcut to art? Someone who doesn't do any art, someone who hasn't done any art, someone who actually hasn't made a book. If you haven't made a book, that's when you're liable to say, oh my goodness, you know, you could do this. Trust me, you could do this quickly. Let's take a look at this. This is 4/6. This is season 4. We're probably maybe in the middle of season 4 right now in real time. Obviously, I'm ahead because obviously I make my own series. So I've got the print versions of the book. This is not Daz Studio. Don't get it confused. This is not Poser. And this is not ZBrush, 3D coat, or substance painter. This is sequential art being done by an artist. Story from A to Z. None of this is supplied by Daz Studio. The assets are used, but Daz Studio does not make me suddenly become a comic book artist. CGI is not a shortcut for being unable to draw. You'll find that you'll hit the same crossroads that everyone else does. If you're not artistic and have an artistic vision, then all you're going to do is present a craft, a bunch of images that don't really have any emotional value because no emotional value is put into it. You're not thinking with an artist eye. You're just making stuff, which is cool to have content, but it doesn't have any emotional impact. This is what they agonize over. Every scene, every detail. It's a little bit different because let's just say, for instance, the writing is done by a different person and so is the art. So there's true, I don't know, the word is a synergy that has to be matched, which is traditional. And what I was saying about people who tend to want to chime in about comics who haven't made any, they tend to look at things that were done in 1970 as if it's applicable today. And if you're going to say the base concepts translate, and I mean like, good framing, good panel structure, an easy to follow story, easy to read, the recaps, all the things that make comics enjoyable to read, to make a story clear, excellent art. Those things are truths and universal truths. But we also need to be almost like a critic to understand the history and how much of comics was done because they were based on a print medium. They were done because of the inking system that was used. They were done because of deadlines. Why do they use certain lettering? Why? These are things that you don't know unless you're part of that realm. Unless you're actually talking to someone who does comics or did comics, you're not going to know that stuff. And what you'll do is look at an old comic and attempt to reverse engineer it. And you'll say, this is how it looked, so therefore that is how it should look. Which is being very traditional, but you're not taking into account. Comics of the 80s didn't like the ones from the 70s. 70s comics didn't like the ones from the 60s. 60s didn't like the ones from the 50s. So why would a comic from 2020 look like one from 2000? Or 1990. But what did they get right was a sequential story. What stories survived? What art was so good it was worth carrying into the future? You don't have to say, well, this is when art was best. This is when storytelling was best. It's not really about the period of time. It's about the execution. Because in any previous era, they were crappy stories. In any previous era, there was crappy art. So you can't say, well, back then it was better, because I was there back then. And they were crappy books back then that didn't sell, that I bought issue 1 and 2 of and didn't buy 3. So we can't pretend like all of a sudden because these 20 books survived the course of time, that's just how every book was back then. Or because there's only 20 good books now, it somehow means that this is a lower error. And therefore, we should follow what they used to do in the past. You need to know why they did things. It's a different medium. We have mobile now. People are reading. My books are read on tablets. They're read on tablets. My audience is reading my books. I think it's 98% tablet, 1% mobile, and 1% desktop. So everyone is reading books on Kindle or whatever it is they've got. They're reading the books on a tablet. So what should my format be? Tablet. I do print books because I'm a traditionalist. I'm I'm old as hell, so I value printed comics. Do I still go to comic book stores? No. I visit, talk to the owner, kick it, find out what's going on, hear what their problems are, show them my stuff. But, I did distribution for Mark of the Griffin out in my area. I put it in stores. But overall, that's not the goal. We have a digital medium. Everyone wants a printed book. Everyone does. Everyone understands and respects it. How many people go and get them? How many people are visiting their stores? I used to visit a store and know I was going to spend $25. That was my budget. And it didn't matter what was going on. This is title of the book. Good stuff, man. Look at this. You really believe you're just going to install something and arrive here? That's what you believe? It's a silly notion, and to sell that is ridiculous. To shortchange the art, that the amount of work that's put into this, and shortchange it, that it just comes, it just shows up because you use a piece of software. This is sequential art. It's ridiculous. This is what is this? This is 4-6. This is my book. 4-6. This is a couple of issues ago. This is some of my pages, examples of what 4-6 is. By now, if you're on my channel, you gotta have seen all this already. But things like this are not done from Daz Studio. And when people say, oh my goodness, you use that must be Daz Studio. No, this is not Daz Studio. This is me, the sequential artist, building a narrative. This is not in Daz Studio. That's not a tool from the software. This isn't done from the software. It's the environment that I work in. My tool set uses 3D assets. 3D assets do not make my comic. I make the comic. This simple moment of one of my characters activating her robot companion, and he pops on with the bright light that's blinding to my character. This is not a Daz Studio thing. It's just not. There's no shortcut to art, whether it's sculpting, painting, drawing, CGI. You're going to have to put the work in. You have to put the hours in. What we attempt to do is shut down the amount of hours. We want to cut that down. We want to shut down the amount of hours you spend going in circles, not being able to solve a problem. We want to give you tools and techniques to lessen the time you spend troubleshooting and increase the time you spend being creative. We don't want you trying to solve a problem. We want you achieving the hurdle of getting to be the next better version of yourself. That's what the tutorials are about. No one can make you an artist, but they can help unlock it in you. If it's in you and it's your desire, tools can help you. Tutorials can help unlock it. It's not going to give it to you. And if anyone says that something is a shortcut, don't worry, just do this. Don't worry about being an artist. Just do this. Just buy this. It's a lie, because the person hasn't done it themselves. No one says, come get a black belt in my school. I'll give it to you by the end of the week. No one says that. No one says, hey, just join up. You'll be fine. It's going to take the work to put in. It's going to take the work. Years of work. It's a continuous learning process. There are no shortcuts. The only people who say that don't have any work. And if you take a shortcut, it shows up in your work. Show me someone with stellar art and let them tell me it was nothing. Show me someone with an accomplishment and tell me that it was easy. It took nothing. Show me. Where's that person? When you have trouble finding them, you realize you're talking to a lot of people who have not done it. They have not done the thing. Show your work. Where is it then? If it's so easy, show me. Anyone can make a pinup. Anyone can make a page. Anyone can show you a superhero team standing in a circle and say, this is going to be my team. Please help me, support me. Someone help me with this story. Anyone can do that. If you want to draw, you can draw. There's tons of programs out here that can help you draw. If you want to do digital, get a tablet, start to draw. A tablet's like $100. You can get a tablet with a stylus pen and start drawing. You can trace. You can get very far tracing. It's not any big secret that people trace. It's an awesome technique. People use 3D assets and trace over it. What's the big deal? People pose. If you can sit here and pose a doll, do I have any of those here? Where's my doll? Somewhere in the studio, there's a 3D doll, but you can hold the figure. You can configure the doll and pose it, and then draw it. I mean, Art 101 was looking at a picture and then drawing it. That was Art 101. Looking at something and then drawing it. That was 101. What are we talking about here? Anyone can do that. Stare at an apple and sketch it. Come on. What are we talking about? A level that goes beyond that. And if you're going to unlock that in yourself, you're going to need to do more. So I guess the answer to this question is there are no shortcuts in art. You're not going to find a shortcut. There is no magic bullet that's going to make everything easy and accessible. It's not going to suddenly show up and just be something that you're going to get your hands on. Making a comic is a lot of work beyond even just the look of the book. I said that too as a pitfall. Be wary of trying to just achieve the look of a comic. Many of us are trying to make something look like it was drawn, except we achieve making something that looks like an artist would never draw. That if you actually could draw, you wouldn't draw that. And we end up thinking that's enough because it sort of looks like if someone drew it. But what artist would draw that for their book? We know these things when it comes to that. Oh, better not show too much. That's like, big action sequence. We don't want to show that. So with that said, I think we've answered the question that there are no shortcuts. CGI is not going to be a shortcut to making comic books. If you're not an artist, you're not going to make art. It's the truth. You're going to need an artistic approach, willingness to learn. You're going to have to put the hours in. You're going to have discipline to study the craft, get better at it. Sequential art is not the same thing as just drawing cool pictures. It's just not. I don't mean to down anyone who's working on stuff or trying to create in their own lane. I suggest you keep learning, keep going, join the community, do what you can do. But let's be honest, there's no shortcut to art. There's no shortcut to music. Auto-tune won't save you. A good mix, reverb won't save you. And then in the same way, CGI isn't going to be a crutch, and it's not going to get you to comic book heaven. It's just not. So anyone that tells you that is lying. You cannot download a video on how to dance and get rhythm. It doesn't work that way. So that said, Troy, if you want to take some of my classes, I'm surely gonna help you. If you want to call me with whatever problems you're stuck on, I am down to help. It's not as easy as it looks. And again, if someone tells you different, ask them where their book is. Drew Spence, Digital Art Live. I'm in the middle of my 12-week course. Actually, I'm near the tapering off at the end. Shout out to all the my classmates and students who take the course and support the dynamic universe. My books is the 4/6. You see that here. If you're watching this on my channel, you already know. Live streaming sometimes on weekends. I went a little crazy today. There's a whole lot going on. It is what it is. Drew Spence, Digital Art Live. Paul, how we doing? Linwelly, thank you. B and Company, Demon Division. You can Google that. It's on DeviantArt. You can find a lot of these books online, Webtoons, probably Tapas too. I mean, their books are pretty much everywhere. But you saw the pages. You guys are good at that whole Google thing. Let's not pretend you don't look things up. That's it. Drew Spence, the Dynamic Universe. I'll talk to you guys later. I'm out.